please welcome Keene Simonds.
Thank you. And as my wife would say, and this is no knock on Eleanor, it's Simonds like diamonds.
Oh,
yeah,
Simonds.
that's fair enough. So again, thank you so much, Marin Coalition, for allowing me and Trish to come speak to you today at your luncheon. So again, Keene Simonds, I have been the executive officer for Marin County's Local Agency Formation Commission, or LAFCO, as it is better known on the streets, for now the last year and a half. And again, before that, I was the executive officer up in Napa County. And what I would like to do is take the next 15 minutes and just provide a very friendly version of LAFCO 101. And hopefully at the end of those 15 minutes, we will not only have some new LAFCO fans in this room, but also hopefully a better understanding of how Marin LAFCO relates and is a partner with, as Eleanor mentioned, 65 local governmental agencies that all provide some form of municipal service to all of you as residents of Marin County. And this means for me covering the 3 W's of LAFCO. Okay, why are there LAFCOs? What are LAFCO's core responsibilities and duties? And then where is LAFCO's footprint here in Marin County? And then hopefully after Trish, we can get into some good give and take and go forth. But let me just start off with the abstract. So there is a LAFCO in every county in California. We are the friendly regional planning arm of the state of California that is in the business of overseeing the physical formation, expansion, and anything in between to the point of perhaps dissolution and or disincorporation for cities, and there are 11 of them here in Marin County. And then there are 54 special districts that we oversee. And special districts run the gamut from Justin's Marinwood Community Services District. We have a couple of, well, we have more than a couple, but Homestead Valley Sanitary District, which are all independent government bodies, to about 20 or so dependent special districts that are operated either by the county or a city. And so LAFCO on a day-to-day basis has 2 primary functions. The original function is to oversee or to regulate the physical establishment and evolution of these governmental agencies in terms of their physical boundaries, whether they're the incorporated city limits of Mill Valley or the municipal service areas of Marinwood or Homestead. And there's some distinctions there that we can talk about a little later. But LAFCO is in the business of promoting sustainable and logical, orderly government and governmental boundary lines. That, at the end of the day, is what presumably all of us in California, and there's one in every county, have been doing since 1963. And so it was in 1963 that LAFCOs were established by way of then Governor Edmund Brown, who came into election with a rather interesting dynamic going on in California. Came into office, and the state of California's population had gone from 10 million to 15 million just in that 10-year period. And so in the course of dealing with all this new population, the state was seeing an explosion of local governmental agencies. Just between 1950 and 1960, something like 80 cities were created and over 300 or so special districts. And a lot of these new governmental agencies were being created without much forethought into neighbors in other communities or in the region as a whole. And certainly in Marin County, you could look at 1950 and 1960 as Marin having its own population boom. As I just found out yesterday, I think the population in 1950 here was something about 85,000 or so. And by the end of 1959, you had gone up to about 150,000 or so. So in and of itself, Marin County went or increased its population by 70%, or 7% each year. That's a huge number. So it's this context that the state of California decided they were no longer effectuating smart planning in Sacramento in terms of their responsibility to oversee when cities and special districts get created and when do they expand to serve new territories. So the idea was, let's create a commission in every county that still administers state planning law, but does so through the lenses of local officials. And that's what LAFCO does. We administer local or state planning laws, again, relative to cities and special districts, boundaries, and service areas, but we do so through the composition of locally elected or appointed officials. So Marin County right now, and I have one boss in attendance already, has 3 county supervisors, Damon being one, and then we have 3 city council members. Then we have 3 special district members. These 9 elected representatives serve on LAFCO, and those 9 then appoint 2 members of the general public. So those are my bosses. I have 11 bosses in Marin County, and they're divided between 7 voting members and then 4 alternates who show up in case one of the regular members is missing. Since 1963, our focus has been mostly tied to the regulatory component. And that is going through the processes to make sure when a city wants to expand its jurisdictional boundary or a new community wants to incorporate, that there's a certain level of uniform analysis that occurs that ultimately allows the commission to either say this makes sense or it doesn't make sense. And if the commission does say it makes sense, well, it does go to the people most of the time. Now, there are a couple of exceptions that I'll talk about where we waive protest proceedings, but that's very limited and usually tied to when all the landowners and registered voters have signed off and said, we're on board with this. Beginning in 1973, however, and LAFCOs are subject to their own critique by the Legislative Analyst's Office, it was decided we need to be a little better at our own planning, i.e. we need to do a better job at informing our regulatory activities. And so beginning in 1973, the state legislature told us to start drawing and establishing spheres of influence for every local agency under our jurisdiction. And a sphere of influence is the state's version of an urban growth boundary line. It's the delineation in which LAFCO says, Agency X, this is your probable future jurisdictional boundary or service area. And if you want to annex any lands that's in your sphere of influence, that's okay. You can come forward and make your best case. It doesn't guarantee annexation. It just says you have the opportunity to ask for annexation. It also allows LAFCO to make a very clear line in the sand as to the areas the commission does not believe should be developed, at least not in any near time frame in terms of urban uses. And so all 65 governmental agencies subject to LAFCO have a sphere of influence. And if you went to our website at www.marinlafco.org, we have a wonderful interactive mapping system where you can look up where you live and find out what agencies, not only are you physically in their jurisdictional boundary, but what spheres of influence you're in. But one of the key functions of LAFCO from 1973 on has not only been to draw spheres of influence, but to prepare studies. And I would certainly say going forward, our footprint in Marin County really is focusing in on preparing independent studies where we look at the supply and demand of services that are necessary to accommodate existing development as well as any future development. And for example, right now we are involved in a countywide study of water service where we're looking at what is the overall availability of potable water, what is the overall demand for potable water, and then what is the relationship over the next 10 to 15 years. And then through this study, LAFCO is going to make some determinations on not only if there are areas in which improvements are needed or at least need to be recognized, but it's the vehicle in which LAFCO may decide that additional study and/or action is needed. For example, I know we have 2 members from the Homestead Valley Sanitary District in attendance, so we might as well go right to their example. Many years ago, maybe 10 years ago, LAFCO did a study of southern Marin looking at sewer service provision, and it deduced that there was an opportunity for greater economies of scale by taking 4 independent sewer districts and making them one, and that's referred to as a consolidation for LAFCO purposes. So this is a good example of how LAFCO works. The LAFCO board deduces, yes, based on our own independent work, we think the consolidation makes sense. However, the commission also recognized, at least a majority of them did, that conclusion wasn't necessarily a slam dunk amongst the affected communities of Homestead, Alto, parts of Mill Valley, and I believe Richardson Bay. And Almonte, excuse me, thank you, Henry. And so, while the commission said, let's go ahead and consolidate these 4 governmental agencies into one, the voters got to decide whether they agreed with LAFCO. So there is a checks and balance to what LAFCO does. And ultimately, while Marin LAFCO thinks it's a good idea to consolidate these 4 agencies, the registered voters went a different way, and that's fine. That's how the system works. I see I have a couple minutes left. What I want to emphasize, just for the benefit of this discussion, because I understand certainly in Marin it's a key issue about representation. Okay, so LAFCO is a regional governmental body. There's no way around that. We are in the business of looking at collective governance in which services and community needs overlap one another. I have often been asked about this dynamic of not having directly elected members on the commission making these decisions. And that's a comment I think that Trish is going to talk about a little bit with joint powers authorities. And I do want to make the distinction, LAFCO is not a joint power authority, nor do we oversee joint power authorities. So there is a distinction there. But keep in mind that LAFCOs were created by the state legislature in 1963. Up until 1963, it was the state in Sacramento that was making decisions in 58 counties on when boundary lines should be created, when they should be modified, and so on. And the decision then was, we're not doing a good job. So rather than stay in Sacramento and make these fundamental decisions that affect people on the ground, the decision was, let's at least create a mechanism where local officials, the majority of which are elected from local government bodies, implement LAFCO law. And I think that's an important distinction in terms of the organic nature of LAFCO. Every LAFCO exercises its discretion a little differently. For example, I came from a county that had a different perception of what urban sprawl is compared to what Sonoma thinks urban sprawl is. And I make this comment because no LAFCO does everything the same way. There's a tremendous amount of discretion, and that's by way of design in how we go about deciding when an annexation makes sense, when an incorporation makes sense, or when a special district consolidation makes sense. It's all predicated on the idea of what are the local conditions and circumstances. So again, as we go through this discussion today, keep that in mind. LAFCO is a state entity, but through the prism of local officials and through local eyes.